I never thought I'd see a grown woman sprinting down a dirt road screaming, until the bees taught her what boundaries mean. I never thought justice could buzz, until the HOA president started stealing my mail, writing her own rules, and daring me to fight back. I didn't yell. I didn't break a thing. I just let nature do what it does best, with wings, evidence, and a sting she never saw coming. Because sometimes, the hive knows how to defend itself. I never imagined I'd see a grown woman sprinting down Redwater Road, arms flailing, pink blazer flashing under the Montana sun, while a storm of bees trailed behind her like smoke. Yet there she was, Bethany Whitfield, president of the local HOA, self-declared queen of order and property lines, screaming her way past my cedar gate. The hum of her panic mingled with the buzz of the swarm, a sound that belonged more to nature's courtroom than any man's. From my porch, coffee cup in hand, I watched her stumble into the dust and thought. That morning, the bees weren't the dangerous ones. She was. The story didn't start with chaos. It began with quiet. Too much quiet, maybe. 5 years earlier, after 20 years managing dam hydraulics for the Bureau of Reclamation, I'd retired to the one thing I understood better than pressure: balance. My ranch sat where the lake curled against Redwater Ridge, a line of pines marking the boundary between wild land and human stubbornness. I built the house myself, post by post, choosing every beam like a man building his own piece. The hives came later. Sarah, my wife, had read somewhere that beekeeping could lower stress, which I found ironic. "You've spent your life controlling floods," she'd said. "Maybe it's time to learn from something that controls itself." She wasn't wrong. Bees were honest workers. They didn't gossip, didn't hold meetings, didn't fine each other for where they built. They understood boundaries instinctively. Every hum, every flight had purpose. That was before the HOA came knocking. Bethany Whitfield moved in the spring after her husband flipped the old McAllister property, the one with the big white porch that faced the lake. She arrived in a convoy of moving trucks, sunglasses that could block out truth, and a clipboard like a badge. Within days, the neighborhood mailboxes were freshly painted and labeled with neat stenciled numbers. She called it uniform aesthetics. I called it a warning shot. At first, I played along. I'd seen bureaucrats before, spent decades working under them. People like her thrive on small victories, and it's easier to nod than to argue. But then, things started disappearing. It began with an Amazon box, beekeeping gloves I'd ordered from Billings. The tracking app said delivered, but the porch was bare. I figured maybe the wind caught it, or maybe the delivery guy left it at the wrong gate. Then it happened again. A new smoker nozzle. Gone. A pack of wax foundations. Gone. Every missing parcel had one thing in common: my name on the label. I checked my security camera only to find the cable unplugged, cleanly, deliberately. No damage, no animal tracks, just silence where truth should have been. That evening, my neighbor Ernest Walker leaned on the fence between our lots, chewing a straw like he was thinking through a confession. "Jake," he said, "I seen something the other day. Thought maybe you should know." He scratched his beard. "That HOA lady, Bethany, picked up a box off your porch last week. Said she was taking it inside for safekeeping." I stared at him, half expecting the punchline. "Safekeeping?" "Yep. Said she was doing a community service. Can't say I buy it." I didn't either. I've seen floods, landslides, bureaucratic cover-ups, but something about a neighbor stealing mail under the flag of community rubbed me rawer than all of them. There's a law of nature I live by. Every action finds equilibrium. You build a dam, you relieve pressure. You block a river, the water finds another way. Bethany was about to learn that law applies to people too. For the next few days, I pretended nothing was wrong. I mowed the pasture, fed the goats, tended the hives, but my eyes never left that road. Bethany walked her little white dog every morning at 10 sharp, clipboard tucked under one arm, sunglasses hiding whatever justification brewed behind them. She'd slow near my gate, pretending to read her phone, and I'd see her glance at the porch. The third time it happened, I decided to stop guessing. I went down to the county postmaster, asked a few quiet questions, and found out what I already knew. No HOA had jurisdiction over mail delivery. Federal property, federal offense. The clerk even laughed when I mentioned package inspections. "Sounds like your neighbor's got too much time," he said. "You want us to file a report?" "Not yet," I told him. "I've got my own way of filing." That night, the sky hung low over Redwater Lake, heavy with stormlight. The hives pulsed softly under the eaves, thousands of wings whispering like rainfall. Sarah joined me on the porch, wrapping a blanket over her shoulders. "You're thinking," she said. "I can hear it." "I'm planning," I corrected. Her eyes narrowed, a half-smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Whatever it is, don't do anything stupid." "Nothing stupid," I promised. "Just educational." When she went inside, I stood alone in the dark, watching the porch light throw a halo over the empty steps. Somewhere beyond the trees, an owl called once, slow, deliberate. The air smelled of pine and smoke and something sharper, the sting of injustice waiting to strike back. And as I looked toward Bethany's porch light flickering across the lake, I whispered to the hives behind me, "Don't worry, girls. We'll teach her about boundaries, our way." The next morning broke with a light wind, pushing ripples across Redwater Lake. The smell of wet cedar filled the air, that mix of wood and morning dew that always felt like a reset. I brewed coffee on the old gas stove, stepped out onto the porch, and took in the view that had sold me this place 5 years back. Mist lifting off the hills, the faint drone of bees waking with the sun, and nothing else. Or so I thought. The first sound that broke the calm was the sharp click-clack of high heels on gravel. I turned and saw her again, Bethany Whitfield, making her rounds with her tiny white dog, Princess, a leash that looked like a silver chain glinting in the sun. Clipboard under her arm, sunglasses perched like armor. She nodded once in my direction, but didn't smile. She didn't need to. The silence said plenty. "Morning," I called out. She paused at the end of my drive, pen hovering above her notepad. "Mr. Remy, have you considered repainting your mailbox? The HOA requires uniform gloss white." "My mailbox," I said slowly, "has been standing there since before this HOA existed." She made a little check mark anyway, as if my words were background noise. "Regulations exist for a reason, Mr. Remy. Order keeps peace." I took a sip of my coffee. "Out here, peace keeps order just fine." Her lips tightened. Then she turned and strutted down the road, Princess prancing behind her like a warning flag. By the time she disappeared around the bend, my phone buzzed. A message from Amazon. Package delivered at 9:17 a.m. I walked to the porch. Nothing. Just a faint shoe print in the dust. Later that day, I found Ernest Walker leaning against his fence again, his straw hat pulled low over his weathered face. He watched me with that look farmers get when they know more than they're ready to say. "Jake," he started, "that woman's been sniffing around more than bees at a honey spill. Saw her on your porch again yesterday. Said she was keeping an eye out for suspicious activity." I raised an eyebrow. "On my property?" "Yep," he said, chewing thoughtfully. "Funny thing, though, no one else's mail ever goes missing." The pattern was clear as the lake reflection. Bethany wasn't protecting anyone. She was targeting me. That evening, after dinner, Sarah sat at the kitchen table grading nursing charts on her laptop. "You've been quiet," she said without looking up. "Trying to figure out why someone steals things they don't need," I said. "She's not after the contents. She's after control." Sarah looked up, her eyes calm but firm. "Then don't give her the reaction she wants." I nodded, but my mind was already working. The way a dam engineer studies a current, I was mapping her behavior. Times, routes, little lapses in her control. Every morning, the same path. Every week, new rules. Every time someone pushed back, she'd send a printed citation wrapped in HOA letterhead. 3 nights later, I saw her through the blinds again. The moon was bright enough to paint the gravel silver. She walked past my gate, flashlight in one hand, clipboard in the other. She stopped at my porch, bent down, and studied something by the step, maybe checking if the offending bees were still there. Then she did it again, reached out, and took another small box, tucked it under her arm, and left. I could have run out, could have called the sheriff right then. But anger clouds the mind, and I've spent too many years learning patience. I waited until the next morning. At sunrise, I drove into town to the county clerk's office. The woman behind the counter was new, young, sharp-eyed. Her name tag read Lucy Harper. "Can I help you, sir?" "Just looking to confirm something," I said. "Does the Homeowners Association have any legal jurisdiction over private mailboxes?" She frowned, shook her head. "No, sir. Mailboxes are federal property. Tampering with deliveries, that's a postal offense." "Good to know," I said, sliding her a small stack of papers. "Can you make me 3 certified copies of that code section?" She raised an eyebrow but smiled. "Trouble with the HOA?" "You could say that." Back at the ranch, I pinned 1 copy to the inside of my garage door, another under the porch light, and the 3rd on my fridge. Sometimes, it's good to keep your weapons visible, even when they're just words on paper. By late afternoon, Bethany had taped another note to my gate. "Your unregistered hives violate community guidelines, Section 4B. I tore it off and laughed. Section 4B didn't exist. That evening, Ernest dropped by with 2 cold beers. He stood on the porch looking out over the lake, where the last light stretched thin over the water. "You ain't gonna let her run you off your own land, are you?" he asked. "Not a chance, Vassan," I said. "I'm just giving her enough rope to hang her clipboard." He chuckled, low and gravelly. "Well, if you ever need a witness, I'm your man. Been wanting to see someone put that woman in her place without saying a word." The hum from the hives grew louder as dusk deepened, thousands of wings stitching the air with rhythm. I could feel the balance returning, not yet justice, but the calm before it. Inside, Sarah looked up as I locked the door. "You're smiling," she said. "That's your dangerous kind of calm." "Just thinking," I replied. "Karma's got wings." Outside, the wind shifted across the lake, and the soft murmur of bees carried on the breeze like a promise waiting to be kept. Outside, the wind shifted across the lake, and the soft murmur of bees carried on the breeze like a promise waiting to be kept. By morning, the sky was the color of steel, thin, cold light pressing down on Redwater Ridge, the kind of weather that made you feel like something was about to break, though you couldn't say what. When I stepped out onto the porch, I saw it. Another envelope taped to my gate, flapping against the cedar post like a surrender flag that didn't know which side it belonged to. "Notice of violation," it read in bold, self-important font. I didn't need to open it to guess who'd written it. The HOA seal was crooked, the ink too dark, the language trying too hard to sound official. Sarah found me reading it over coffee. "Let me guess," she said. "Another decree from the Queen?" "Section 6C this time," I replied. "Apparently my hives pose an environmental hazard." She gave a quiet laugh. You mean the same bees that pollinate half the gardens in this neighborhood? I folded the notice, slid it into a drawer already thick with duplicates. Seems she's creating her own laws faster than nature can break them. Bethany's new crusade wasn't about honey or safety. It was about control. I knew the type. When I worked dams, I'd met supervisors just like her, people who thought the rules were clay in their hands. The moment they felt small, they built a tower of paper to stand on. That afternoon, I drove into town to the HOA's rented office space, a small white building beside the community pool. Inside, the air smelled of chlorine and copier ink. A woman at the front desk, gray hair in a bun, looked up from her knitting. "Afternoon, Mr. Remy," she said. It was Pam, the secretary who'd been there since before Bethany moved in. "Afternoon, Pam," I said. "Mind if I ask how long Section 6C's been part of our bylaws?" Her knitting needles paused mid-air. "Section what?" "6C, environmental hazards." She blinked, thought for a moment, then pulled a binder from the shelf behind her. Old, heavy, its tabs yellowed from time. She flipped through, finger tracing the pages. "No such section," she said finally. "Never has been." "Didn't think so." I left the office with that confirmation folded neatly in my jacket pocket, like ammunition. The lake wind was picking up again, and as I walked past the pool gates, I caught sight of Bethany's car pulling up. A white SUV, HOA magnets gleaming on the doors. She stepped out in a coral blazer, holding another stack of papers. "Mr. Remy?" she called, all sugar and vinegar. "I hope you received your notice." "Oh, I did," I said, keeping my tone level. "And I just came from Pam's desk. Seems Section 6C doesn't exist." She hesitated, just a flicker, before regaining her smile. "We're updating our bylaws to reflect modern safety standards. I'm sure you understand." "Sure," I said. "As long as those updates go through the county, like they're supposed to." Her smile thinned. "We prefer to handle things internally." "I prefer to handle my mail internally too," I said, turning away. Yet here we are. Her heels clicked on the pavement behind me, sharp, deliberate. "You should be careful with that tone, Mr. Remy. Non-compliance carries penalties." I stopped, looked back at her over my shoulder. "You can't fine someone for standing on their own land." Her eyes narrowed just slightly, but enough for me to see the crack in her porcelain calm. "We'll see what the board says." That night, the bees worked late. I stood by the hives under the glow of my porch light, the air filled with the slow rhythm of wings. Each sound felt like punctuation in a language I understood better than words. Organized chaos, disciplined freedom. I spent half the night building my own stack of paper. Receipts from deliveries, printed photos from the camera system I'd reinstalled, a copy of the postal code Lucy had certified for me, and the HOA charter with Section 6C glaringly absent. Every piece was a thread in the web she was spinning, and every web has a breaking point. The next morning, Ernest showed up in his pickup, dust rising behind him like a small storm. He leaned out the window. "Heard you got yourself another letter." "Yeah," I said, "and she's making up laws now." He chuckled. "Knew she'd try that sooner or later. You gonna fight it?" "I don't fight," I said. "I build." He looked puzzled, but I just nodded toward the folders stacked on my porch rail. "Paper walls, stronger than any fence." He grinned. "You always did play the long game." Over the next week, I noticed the shift. Neighbors who once waved now looked both ways before doing so. Bethany had been busy, door to door with her clipboards, whispering about unregistered livestock and aggressive insects. Her empire was made of gossip, but gossip travels faster than facts. Until one morning, it all turned back on her. I'd gone into town for lumber, and when I returned, Sarah met me at the door, half laughing, half astonished. "You'll want to see this," she said, handing me a printed flyer she'd pulled from our mailbox. Across the top, in bold black letters, Community Safety Bulletin, unverified mail reports, and beneath it, a photo. Not of me, of Bethany. Mid-stride, clutching one of my boxes under her arm, someone, probably Ernest, had caught her red-handed on their own doorbell camera. The photo spread through the neighborhood faster than wildfire. By sunset, every porch had a copy. When I walked out to my hives that night, the air felt lighter. Not victory, just the weight of truth shifting. I'd learned a long time ago that water always finds its level, and lies, no matter how high they climb, eventually sink. Still, I wasn't done. Paper exposes deceit, but patience enforces it. I ran, my hand along the nearest hive, the wood warm under my palm. "Not yet, girls," I whispered. "We're just getting started." The sun had barely broken over the ridge, painting Redwater Lake with a copper glow when I began planning. The kind of plan that doesn't come from anger, but from balance. I wasn't interested in vengeance. I was interested in correction, an education, you could say. Bethany wanted to enforce rules that didn't exist. I'd show her what happens when someone builds on false foundations. I pulled out an old Amazon box from the garage, dust still clinging to its flaps. The hum of the bees in the background was steady, rhythmic, like they were keeping time with my thoughts. Inside the box, I placed a small GPS tracker no larger than a coin. I'd used similar devices years ago when monitoring flood sensors near the dam, a little leftover piece of technology that still had purpose. Next came the dye pack. Nothing dangerous, just a small fishing bait marker. When it burst, it left a faint yellow tint on anything it touched, harmless but visible. I added a folded piece of paper on top. In thick black letters, it read, "Smile for the camera, Karen." Sarah walked into the garage while I was sealing the box. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, wearing that look she saved for moments when she wasn't sure if I was brilliant or insane. "Should I even ask?" "It's just a little reminder," I said, taping the top shut. "Lesson in accountability." "Jake," she sighed, "you know how this ends. She'll find a way to twist it." "She already has," I said. "This time I'm twisting it back." By mid-morning, I had the decoy ready. The label on top read, "Organic honey samples. Fragile." I set it neatly beside the porch, right where the delivery guy usually left my real packages. Then I angled my new camera toward the spot, lens hidden inside one of the decorative bee boxes Sarah had painted last spring. The day passed slow. Clouds drifted over the lake, throwing long shadows across the water. Around 10, I heard the familiar rhythm of heels on gravel. Right on time. Bethany appeared at the end of the drive, clipboard under one arm, phone in the other. She scanned the road, the mailbox, my porch. Princess trotted beside her, tail wagging like nothing was wrong in the world. When she spotted the package, she hesitated. I could see the calculation behind her sunglasses. Curiosity fighting conscience. Conscience lost. She bent down, pretended to read the label, then lifted the box as carefully as if it were glass. Through the live feed on my phone, I watched her glance around once more before striding off toward her garage. The GPS pinged a steady green dot moving up Maple Hollow Lane. I waited an hour before driving past her house. From the road, I could see her through the open garage door, bent over a table, slicing the tape open with a pair of scissors. She froze halfway through, reading the note inside. Even from the street, I could tell the color drained from her face. Then she looked at her palms, already blooming, with faint yellow stains. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. That evening, while the sky burned orange over Redwater Ridge, I sat on the porch sipping coffee. Sarah joined me, silent for a while before finally asking, "How'd your little experiment go?" "Educational," I said, smiling. The next day, the HOA sent out an email blast. Subject line, Community alert. Package tampering. Bethany's message warned residents to be vigilant about suspicious deliveries. She didn't mention the die or the note, but I knew it rattled her. At the weekly board meeting, she strutted in with that same clipboard, but her hands were scrubbed raw, pale where the die had been. I sat near the back of the room, letting her words wash over me like static. Unattended packages, she said, voice trembling slightly, pose significant risks to our community. It's everyone's duty to ensure safety and order. When she paused for breath, I raised my hand. Madam President, I said, polite as a preacher, are we authorized to remove private mail from porches? Her smile flickered. This isn't about me, Mr. Remy. Oh, I think it's about everyone, I replied, especially those holding someone else's property. A low murmur rippled through the room. I held up a small manila folder. I've compiled the postal regulations and a few pictures, for transparency. Her jaw tightened. That's not necessary. I think it is, I said, standing. The county sheriff agrees. Maybe he'll drop by next week to clarify things. That last line hit her like a stone skipping across calm water, silent ripples spreading outward. Her posture stiffened. You wouldn't. Bethany, I said softly, you've already done the hard part yourself. The room fell quiet. Pam, the secretary, looked down at her knitting, pretending not to hear. Even Marcus Reed, the HOA vice president, shifted uncomfortably. I didn't stay for the rest. I left before the vote on community packaging protocol. By the time I reached home, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You've made a mistake, Jake. No signature, but I didn't need one. I looked out over the lake, the surface dark and glassy, the reflection of the hives trembling in the porch light. A storm was coming, both in the sky and closer to home. I poured another cup of coffee and sat with the sound of the bees, steady and calm. Don't worry, Om, I whispered. She's not the first to learn that nature always settles its debts. By morning, Redwater County was humming with gossip. The photo of Bethany clutching my stolen package had made its rounds across the HOA group chat, faster than wildfire in Dry Sage. I hadn't shared it myself. Truth doesn't need a megaphone when pride does the shouting. When I stepped outside, Ernest was already leaning against his truck, holding a folded flyer. You seen this? He asked, handing it over. It was the same picture. Printed grainy, but clear enough. Bethany's face mid-turn, my box under her arm. A headline written by someone with a wicked sense of humor read, Queen Bee caught red-handed. She's mad as a hornet, Ernest said, grinning through his gray beard. Heard she's calling an emergency meeting tonight. Let her, I said, taking a slow sip of coffee. About time the hive got a little sunlight. That night, the HOA clubhouse was packed tighter than hay in a winter barn. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the air smelled like burnt coffee and perfume. Bethany stood at the front behind a folding table, pink blazer crisp as ever. A thin smile stretched across her face like a crack in porcelain. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, she began, voice smooth but trembling, just enough for anyone listening closely to hear the nerves underneath. It seems there's been a misunderstanding regarding certain photographs circulating online. A murmur rolled through the room. Before rumors continue to spread, she said, I'd like to clarify that any packages I handled were taken for community safety reasons. It's my responsibility as HOA president to maintain order and security. I raised my hand. So you're saying it's HOA policy to remove mail from private property? Her eyes darted toward me like a hawk spotting prey. This isn't about you, Mr. Remy. Oh, I think it is. I stood, voice even, calm. Because that box you took was mine, and that footage came from my security camera, the one you unplugged. The room quieted. I felt every eye turn toward us. The neighbors, the board, even Pam, the secretary, who had stopped knitting mid-stitch. Bethany's smile tightened. I don't appreciate being accused of theft in public. Then let's not call it theft, I said. Let's call it what the county sheriff calls it, tampering with federal property. I printed the statute if you'd like a copy. I pulled a small folder from my jacket and laid it on the table. A single sheet of paper slid free, stamped with the county seal. The silence that followed was thicker than the lake fog. From the back of the room, someone chuckled. Then another. Even Marcus Reed, the vice president, let out a nervous laugh before catching himself. Bethany's face flushed red. This is harassment, she snapped. The HOA doesn't tolerate… Harassment, I interrupted softly. You mean like slipping violation notices onto people's doors at dawn? Or inventing bylaws that don't exist? Pam cleared her throat. Ma'am, I checked the records, she said gently. There's no Section 6C. Never has been. The room stirred again, louder this time. Murmurs, whispers, the sound of truth waking up. Bethany opened her mouth, closed it, then pointed at me like a preacher calling out sin. You think you're clever, Mr. Remy. You're mocking this community. No, I said. I'm protecting it. She slammed her folder shut and marched out of the room. The door rattled behind her like a gavel hitting the end of a trial. For a moment, the crowd stayed silent. Then Ernest's voice came from the back. Guess the queen lost her crown. Laughter broke out, hesitant at first, then freer, lighter. It wasn't mean, it was release. The kind of laugh folks share when they realize the storm is passing. I didn't linger. I walked outside into the cool Montana night. The moon hung low over the lake, silver light dancing on the water. The air smelled of pine and cold justice. Sarah was waiting by the truck. You actually went easy on her, she said, sounding half surprised. She did the hard part herself, I replied. I just held up the mirror. As we drove home, headlights carving tunnels through the mist, the tension that had gripped the neighborhood for weeks began to unwind in my chest. For the first time, I thought maybe this was the end of it. Maybe she'd had enough. But deep down, I knew better. People like Bethany don't stop when they're wrong. They double down. She'd tasted humiliation, and humiliation has a way of turning pride into poison. When we reached the ranch, I stepped out and listened. The bees were calm again, their hum rising and falling with the rhythm of the night wind. I stood there for a long time, staring at the dark line of trees beyond the fence. Lesson learned? Sarah asked quietly. For now, I said. But the hive isn't done buzzing yet. When we reached the ranch, I stepped out and listened. The bees were calm again, their hum rising and falling with the rhythm of the night wind. I stood there for a long time, staring at the dark line of trees beyond the fence. Lesson learned? Sarah asked quietly. For now, I said, but the hive isn't done buzzing yet. I meant it as a figure of speech, but the next few days made it sound more like prophecy. The neighborhood slipped into a strange kind of silence. No knocks on doors, no new HOA letters, not even Bethany's morning patrols. It was almost peaceful, almost. In my experience, calm that deep usually hides something stirring beneath it. The first sign came in the form of a single sheet of paper taped to my gate. It flapped lazily in the breeze, sunlight catching the edges like it was taunting me. I peeled it off and read aloud. Effective immediately. The keeping of insects, hives, or pollinating colonies within HOA territory is strictly prohibited. Violators will be fined daily. Sarah looked over my shoulder. You've got to be kidding. I wasn't. And neither was Bethany. She'd finally declared war. The notice was written in her signature font. Big, bold, and a little too self-assured. I could almost hear her voice through the ink. I folded it neatly and set it on the counter. "Jake," Sarah said cautiously, "you're not seriously going to ignore that, are you?" "I don't ignore nonsense," I said. "I file it." After breakfast, I grabbed the folder where I kept every HOA letter and drove into town. The clerk at the county agriculture office, an older man named Bill Franks, had seen my face enough times to know what was coming. "What's she trying now?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. "Apparently, bees are no longer welcome within HOA lines." Bill laughed. "Well, that's a first. You're still registered under the Pollinator Protection Act, right?" I slid him my paperwork. 3 years running, inspected, certified, insured. He whistled low. "Then she doesn't have a leg to stand on. You're protected by state law." "That's what I thought. Mind printing me a copy of that section?" He grinned and hit the printer. "Gonna hang it on her door?" "Something like that." By the time I drove home, I could feel the weight of the coming storm pressing down on Redwater Ridge. The clouds were thick, the air heavy with that metallic scent that precedes a downpour. I nailed a laminated copy of my registration right beside the porch steps, next to the notice she'd left. The irony looked good in the sunlight. That afternoon, I saw her white SUV roll slowly past my gate. She didn't stop, but she didn't look away either. Her sunglasses hid her eyes, but I could feel the heat of her stare. Later that evening, Ernest stopped by. "Heard you're public enemy number 1 now," he said, climbing out of his truck with a grin. "Guess so," I said. "Apparently, I'm corrupting the neighborhood with insects." He snorted. "If those bees are corrupting anything, it's the flower beds." As the sun dipped behind the ridge, the air turned golden. The lake caught the light, flashing like glass. For a moment, it was hard to imagine there was anything wrong in the world. But that's how trouble works. It waits for you to get comfortable. The next morning, I found new flyers in every mailbox. Neighborhood health alert, aggressive pollinators reported. The author was anonymous, but everyone knew who wrote it. By noon, my phone buzzed. It was Marcus Reed, the HOA vice president. His voice was nervous, like someone walking on gravel barefoot. "Jake, listen. I don't agree with all this. You should know that." I figured as much. "She's pushing hard. Says you've endangered the community." "Endangered," I repeated. "The bees are documented as a protected species." "I know," he said, "but she's got half the board convinced you're violating bylaws. I'm trying to talk sense into them, but you're outnumbered," I finished. "Exactly," he sighed. "She called another board meeting tonight. You might want to show up. Bring proof." I smiled faintly. "I've got plenty." That evening, the air inside the clubhouse was thick with tension. The walls buzzed with whispered conversations. Bethany sat at the front, her hair pulled tight, a stack of papers in front of her like ammunition. "Mr. Remy," she said sweetly, "thank you for joining us. I'm afraid this matter concerns your property." "I gathered," I said, setting my folder on the table. "Care to explain why you're posting illegal notices under my name?" "Illegal?" she echoed, pretending to be shocked. "The HOA has full authority over community safety." "Not over state agriculture," I said, pulling out the certificate and sliding it across the table. "These hives are registered under county law, protected by Statute 14, subsection B. Your rule holds as much weight as a parking ticket on a horse." Laughter rippled through the crowd, small but growing. Marcus leaned back, trying to hide a smile. Bethany's face flushed. "This is outrageous. You think you can mock me with paperwork?" "I think paperwork is the reason I don't have to mock you," I said quietly. "It speaks for itself." Pam, the secretary, cleared her throat. "He's right, Bethany. We can't override county permits." For a moment, Bethany said nothing. Then she snapped her folder shut, each motion sharp enough to cut air. "This isn't over," she said. I didn't expect it to be, I replied. When I left the meeting, rain was beginning to fall. Light at first, then heavier, until the road glistened under the street lamps. I stood by my truck, watching droplets ripple across the lake's surface. Inside the cab, my phone buzzed again. A message from its home. Unknown number. If the law won't stop you, something else will. I stared at it for a long moment, then looked out toward the dark stretch of road that led back to her house. The storm had finally broken. Rain fell in uneven sheets across Redwater Ridge, wind howling off the lake and rattling the wind chimes under my eaves. The bees huddled deep in their hives, their hum faint under the steady drum of water on the roof. I tried to focus on the sound, but my mind kept circling that message glowing on my phone. If the law won't stop you, something else will. Sarah noticed me pacing by the window. "You all right?" she asked softly. "Fine," I said, though my voice betrayed me. "Just restless." "Then sit," she said. "You'll wear a hole in the floor." But I couldn't. The kind of silence that comes before trouble has a weight to it. You can feel it pressing down on your ribs. Around midnight, the rain eased. The only sound left was the slow drip from the gutter and the faint creak of branches in the wind. I was about to head upstairs when the motion alert buzzed on my phone. The camera feed came up grainy but clear enough. A figure moving along the fence line, a flashlight cutting across the grass like a blade. Bethany. She was dressed in a dark hoodie, hair pulled back, moving slow, deliberate. Something metallic glinted in her hand. Sarah came down the stairs, half asleep, voice tight. "Jake, what is it?" I held up a hand. "Stay inside." She saw the screen and went still. "Is that?" "Yeah," I said. "She's on my property again." Sarah put a hand on my arm. "Don't go out there, just call the sheriff." But I didn't move toward the phone. I knew what McKay would say. Same as always. File a report, wait till morning, let it run its course. But this time, it wasn't about patience. It was about proof. The timestamp on the feed read 2:17 a.m. I slipped on my boots, grabbed the flashlight, and eased open the screen door. The night air was cold, sharp with the scent of wet pine and diesel. I moved along the porch, staying in the shadows. Out by the fence, her light flickered again. She was kneeling beside one of the hives, the one closest to the road, the decoy I'd moved there 2 days earlier. The canister in her hand gleamed under the beam. I recognized the label instantly. Pesticide. "Don't do it," I whispered under my breath. She unscrewed the cap, muttering something to herself, maybe a prayer, maybe an excuse. Then she kicked at the hive with her boot. The box toppled easily. It was empty. And just like that, the silence of the night split open. From 50 feet away, across Ernest's fence line, the real hives woke. A low rumble at first, like distant thunder, then louder, angry wings cutting through the air. The motion light on Ernest's property flicked on, and in its glare, the swarm rose like a moving shadow. Bethany froze, flashlight trembling in her hand. The swarm poured over the fence, a living cloud of gold and black. Her scream tore through the dark, swallowed by the hum. She stumbled backward, dropped the canister, and ran toward the road, arms flailing. I didn't move. Couldn't. Part of me wanted to intervene. The other part knew nature was simply collecting its due. By the time she reached her SUV, the street was alive with light. Porch bulbs snapping on, curtains parting. I saw Ernest step out in his robe, coffee mug in hand, eyes wide. "What in God's name?" Bethany dove into her car, slamming the door. The bees scattered, confused by the headlights. The engine roared to life, tires spinning mud onto the road. She sped down Maple Hollow, horn blaring, hazard lights flashing like distress flares in the rain. I exhaled, long and heavy, my pulse finally catching up with what my eyes had seen. Sarah appeared behind me at the door, pale but steady. "Is she—" "She's fine," I said quietly. "Shaken, maybe stung a few times, but fine." Sarah pressed a hand to her chest. "Jake, you didn't—" "No," I said. "I didn't touch a thing. She did this to herself." I called Sheriff McKay anyway. By the time his cruiser arrived, the rain had turned into a drizzle. He stepped out, boots sinking into the mud, his flashlight sweeping over the toppled hive. "She trespassed again?" he asked. "Looks that way," I said, handing him the footage on my phone. He watched in silence, lips pressed thin. When the video ended, he let out a low whistle. "That's about as clear as it gets. She'll have a hard time arguing this one." "Any damage?" "None," I said. "That hive was empty." He nodded, sliding the phone back to me. "You did right calling it in. I'll file a report for trespass and unlawful use of chemical agents. Probably a fine. Maybe community service." "She's not going to stop, is she?" I asked. He shrugged. "Some folks gotta hit bottom before they look up." By dawn, the sky began to clear. The storm had left the fields slick and shining, puddles glinting like scattered mirrors. I walked out to check the hives. The bees were already back to work, humming low and steady, unbothered by the night's chaos. Ernest came over later that morning, shaking his head. "Whole street's talkin'," he said. "Half think she lost her mind. The other half think she's cursed." "Maybe both," I said. He looked at the hives, then at me. "You gonna press charges?" "No need," I said. "McKay's report and the footage speak louder than I ever could." As he left, I lingered by the fence, looking out at the quiet lake beyond. The air smelled clean, scrubbed by the rain. Nature had spoken, swift and impartial. Sarah joined me, wrapping her arm around my waist. "It's over now, isn't it?" I watched the bees drift lazily across the field, their wings catching the morning light. "For her," I said softly. "Maybe." But deep down, I knew the hum of peace never lasted long in Redwater. Not with someone like Bethany nursing her pride. The hive might have won the night, but the queen was still plotting in the dark. The morning after the incident, the neighborhood woke to a kind of uneasy quiet. The smell of wet soil and cedar hung heavy in the air. I could feel the weight of eyes watching from behind curtains as I carried a cup of coffee to the porch. Every man and woman on this street had seen the lights, heard the screaming, maybe even caught the chaos on their cameras. Redwater was too small for secrets. By noon, word had spread that Sheriff McKay had visited Bethany's house before dawn. The county report confirmed it. Trespassing, illegal pesticide use, property damage. They'd written her up for the whole lot. Nothing criminal, but enough to sting. Ernest came by just before lunch, leaning against his truck like he was settling in for a story. "You know, Jake," he said, "I can't decide what's more poetic, her getting chased off by your bees or her having to explain it to the sheriff with a face full of welts." I shook my head, trying to hide a smile. "Let's hope she learned something." Ernest chuckled. "Oh, she learned something all right. Just not what you wanted her to." He wasn't wrong. That afternoon, the HOA's official email list came alive again. The subject line read, "Emergency Community Meeting. Bee Safety Concerns." The tone was pure Bethany, formal, righteous, soaked in self-pity. I knew better than to expect an apology. When I arrived that evening, the room was packed. The long tables smelled of coffee and paper, and people murmured in small clusters, waiting for the show to start. Bethany sat at the front with one hand wrapped in gauze, her neck spotted faintly red beneath her scarf. She looked like someone who'd survived a small war, but refused to admit she lost. "Thank you for attending," she began, her voice thin and brittle. "As many of you know, Yesterday morning, I was attacked on community grounds by a swarm of aggressive bees belonging to Mr. Remy. There were whispers immediately. Someone stifled a laugh. I raised my hand before she could continue. With respect, I said evenly, the incident took place on my property. I have the footage if anyone wants to verify. Bethany glared. Regardless of property lines, those insects present a danger to this neighborhood. Children, pets. There are no children on this street, Ernest called from the back. And your dog's still yapping fine. The room broke into low chuckles. Bethany flushed, gripping her notes tighter. This isn't a joke. Bees are unpredictable, territorial, and potentially lethal. I propose the immediate removal of all hives from HOA territory. Objection, I said, standing. I could feel the steady rhythm of every eye turning toward me. Those hives are legally registered under the County Agriculture Act. Section 14, subsection B. Pollinators are protected as beneficial assets to the environment. I held up the laminated copy I'd nailed to my porch. Meaning they're safer under state law than this meeting is right now. A few people laughed again, but Marcus Reed, sitting near Bethany, looked uncomfortable. He's right, he said quietly. We can't overrule state law. Bethany snapped. Marcus, please. He sighed. Bethany, he's covered every legal base. We'll just be making fools of ourselves if we push this. The room went silent for a beat, broken only by the hum of the flickering lights. Bethany stood there, jaw tight, her authority crumbling like wet paper. Finally, she said, Fine, but don't come crying to me when someone gets hurt. I smiled. No one will. The bees know their boundaries. Maybe we should all learn from them. The meeting dissolved into scattered conversation as people filed out, half amused, half relieved. Marcus caught my arm as I turned to leave. You didn't humiliate her, he said quietly. You just ended her reign. Nature did, I replied. When I got home, Sarah was waiting on the porch swing, the soft creak of its chains blending with the lake breeze. How bad was it? She asked. Bad for her pride, I said. Good for the neighborhood. She smiled faintly. Then maybe now we can have peace. I wanted to believe her, but peace never lasts long in places built on pride. Over the next week, Bethany tried everything she could to claw back control. She filed noise complaints against my bees, claiming the constant droning was affecting her sleep. The county inspector came out, checked my property, and left laughing. Sir, he told me, these are the calmest bees I've ever seen. You should charge admission. When that failed, she printed flyers. Danger in the neighborhood. Aggressive swarm threatens public health. Someone, probably Paul from 2 houses over, posted a photo online comparing her swarm picture to a stock image of hornets. The caption read, If you can't tell the difference, maybe the bees aren't the problem. By Friday, half the neighborhood was jokingly calling themselves the Honey Owners Association. Someone even slipped a jar of my honey into her mailbox, labeled Community Contribution. The laughter might have been harmless, but I knew it would sting worse than the bees ever did. That Saturday evening, I stood out by the lake as the sun sank behind the ridge. The light turned the water the color of burnt gold, and the hives glowed like small lanterns in the fading dusk. Sarah came up beside me, hand resting on my arm. She's beaten, Jake, she said softly. Let it go. I will, I promised, once the humming stops. The air grew still for a moment. No wind, no sound, until a faint vibration rose again from the hives. Not angry, not restless, just steady, alive. And as I listened, I realized that for the first time in weeks, the neighborhood hum wasn't coming from my bees. It was coming from the people. Conversations, laughter, Normal life creeping back in. Nature had already filed its complaint and settled it. But like any good beekeeper knows, every hive needs watching, especially when one queen refuses to accept she's been replaced. A few weeks passed, and life in Redwater settled into something almost normal. The lawns stayed trimmed, the mailboxes stayed untouched, and the lake reflected the kind of calm you could almost believe in. I spent my mornings checking hives, my afternoons bottling honey, and my evenings on the porch with Sarah, watching the sunlight stretch long across the ridge. For a while, I almost forgot about Bethany Whitfield. Almost. Then, one Friday morning, I opened my mailbox and found an envelope without a return address. The handwriting was sharp, deliberate, too controlled to be casual. I tore it open carefully, expecting another HOA stunt. Inside was a letter, shaky and uneven, written on embossed stationery. Jake. You probably think I got what I deserved. Maybe I did. But I wanted to say this before I go. When the bees came that night, I thought they were punishing me. Now I realize they were reminding me of what happens when you try to control something that was never yours to begin with. I've stepped down from the HOA. Marcus will handle the rest. The county's fine cleaned out what was left of our savings, and my husband wants to move. I don't blame him. You were right. I forgot that peace can't be legislated. It has to be earned. Goodbye and take care of the hives. Bethany. I sat there on the porch, the paper trembling slightly in my hand. Sarah came out, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Another violation? She asked. Something different, I said quietly. She read it over my shoulder. Her voice softened. She actually wrote this? Looks like it. For the first time, I didn't feel anger when I thought of Bethany. Just something heavier, quieter, a strange mix of pity and closure. A few days later, a moving truck rumbled up to the Whitfields' house. Boxes stacked on the lawn, curtains drawn tight. I watched from my porch as Bethany stood by the curb, oversized sunglasses covering the fading marks on her neck. She looked smaller somehow, like the world had finally stripped away all the armor. When she saw me across the road, she hesitated, then nodded once. I nodded back. No words. None were needed. By sunset, the truck was gone. 2 days later, Marcus Reed stopped by. He pulled up in his old blue Ford, holding a clipboard and a tired smile. Figured you'd want to know, he said. The board voted to dissolve the HOA. Technically, it's being converted into a voluntary committee. Folks can join if they want, or not. I raised an eyebrow. So, we're finally free? Free as it gets, he said. We'll still coordinate trash pickup, maybe plan a barbecue once a year. But no more fines, no more bylaws. Sarah brought out lemonade for us. Marcus leaned against the porch railing, sipping quietly as the bees drifted through the air, catching gold in their wings. You know, he said, when Bethany started this HOA thing, she meant well. Her husband was sick then. She needed something to hold on to. I get it, I said. Control can feel like order when everything else is falling apart. Marcus nodded. Still doesn't excuse what she did. But maybe she'll find some peace where she's going. I hope so, I said, because she sure didn't find any here. After he left, I went inside and took a small jar of honey from the kitchen shelf. I tied a piece of twine around the lid and wrote one word on a tag. Peace. That evening, I drove down to the old Whitfield house and left the jar on the front step. No note, no signature, just the golden glass catching the last light of the day. When I got home, Sarah met me at the door. You really left her something. Just honey, Ach, I said. The bees did most of the work. She smiled. You think she'll see it? Maybe. Or maybe the new owners will. Either way, it'll find the right hands. That night, I sat by the window, listening to the hum from the hives. It wasn't angry anymore. It was softer, steadier, a sound that reminded me of forgiveness. The next morning, Paul from across the street wandered over with a grin. "You hear the news?" he asked. "What now?" The county clerk confirmed it. HOA's officially dissolved. She signed the last paper herself before leaving. I leaned back, the sun warm on my face. "Well," I said, "guess the bees weren't the only ones cleaning house." He laughed. "Seems you and your little army taught this town more about law and order than all her bylaws combined." Maybe he was right. But as I looked out over the lake, the water smooth as glass, the sky stretching wide and blue, I realized the story wasn't really about her anymore. It was about something simpler, older than any rulebook, the way nature always finds its own equilibrium. Sometimes justice doesn't need a courtroom, just patience, proof, and a few thousand wings moving in unison. A month passed since the HOA dissolved, and Redwater Ridge began to sound like it used to. You could hear laughter echoing from porches again, the low hum of lawnmowers, dogs barking down by the lake. The air felt lighter, as if the whole place had exhaled. The old HOA sign at the subdivision's entrance had been taken down. Someone replaced it with a hand-painted board that read, "Honey Owners Association, Extension, this spring." It was meant as a joke, but somehow it fit better than the polished metal plaque that came before it. One Saturday morning, I hosted a small get-together at the ranch. Nothing fancy, just coffee, pie, and a chance to remind folks that peace didn't need rules, just respect. Sarah arranged the chairs in a half-circle on the porch. Ernest brought his guitar. Marcus showed up carrying a basket of wildflowers. Even Pam came, smiling like she hadn't in years. When the neighbors arrived, they kept their distance at first, unsure of how to act without an authority watching. But once the coffee started flowing, something changed. Conversations began to loosen. Laughter replaced whispers. The sound of Ernest's guitar drifted across the water like a hymn to normalcy. Marcus raised his cup. "To balance," he said. "To balance," everyone echoed, cups clinking in the morning light. I looked out across the lake, the hives standing steady in the sun, each one glowing faintly gold. The bees moved in and out of them with perfect order. No leaders, no bylaws, no meetings. Just purpose. Just trust. When Sarah came up beside me, she slipped her hand into mine. "You ever think we'd get here?" she asked softly. I shook my head. "Not like this." She smiled. "Maybe that's the point. Nature doesn't give you what you expect. It gives you what you earn." Later that afternoon, Sheriff McKay stopped by. He leaned against his cruiser, hat in hand, the smell of pine and sun oil drifting off his jacket. "Heard your little HOA got an upgrade," he said with a grin. "Volunteer only," I said. "No fees, no fines, no funny business." He chuckled. "Sounds like the best kind of government." As he turned to leave, he paused. "For what it's worth, Jake, you handled it right. Didn't swing fists, didn't break laws, just stood your ground and let the truth do the work." I nodded, watching him drive off down the dirt road, dust swirling in the golden light. That evening, the neighbors lingered long after sunset. We lit lanterns along the fence line, their glow flickering across the field. The bees moved lazily through the air, drawn to the warmth. Someone joked that they were attending the meeting too. When the laughter died down, Ernest strummed a slow tune, something soft and wordless that carried the smell of cedar and lake mist. Sarah rested her head on my shoulder. The night air buzzed with the faint hum of bees returning to their hives, each one carrying a piece of light back home. I closed my eyes and listened. That hum, steady, calm, alive, wasn't just the sound of insects anymore. It was the sound of a neighborhood finding its rhythm again, of people remembering how to live without someone telling them how. I thought about Bethany then, not with anger, but with a strange sort of understanding. She'd been chasing order in a world that doesn't stay still. Maybe she'd finally learned that real control doesn't come from rules. It comes from respect. When the last of the neighbors drifted home and the lanterns burned low, I stood alone by the porch, the lake still as glass. The stars hung heavy over the ridge. I could hear the bees settling, their hum fading into the rhythm of the night. In that quiet, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. Not the kind you fight for, but the kind that arrives when you finally stop fighting. I whispered to the hives, "Good work, girls. You kept the order better than any HOA ever could." From somewhere deep in the dark, a single bee buzzed past my ear, circling once before heading back toward the light. I smiled. Message received. The wind shifted gently across the lake, carrying the scent of honey and pine. Behind me, the porch light flickered once, then steadied, gold and soft, like dawn learning to start again. The hum after the storm had found its place. If you believe real justice doesn't need anger, just patience and proof, drop A in the comments. Every story like this reminds us, standing your ground isn't about fighting harder, it's about standing wiser. And if you'd like to ride along for the next tale of land, law, and quiet revenge, hit subscribe and stay part of this little corner of freedom.